Story 1. On Friday, I took my girlfriend, her daughter who is a senior in high school, and her daughter's boyfriend to see the Blue Man Group. I invited my girlfriend's daughter because she's passionate about theater, and she wanted to bring her boyfriend along so it wouldn't feel awkward. Adding more teenagers to a situation almost guarantees something odd will happen. However, with age comes wisdom, and arguing with a teenager while her mom is right there seemed like a battle I wouldn't win. So, the boyfriend got a free ticket and tagged along. We all piled into my car and drove to the show. It was a great performance, we all had a good time, and after dropping everyone off, I went home. I called it a successful mission, everyone was happy. I went to bed content and woke up to the worst kind of morning. My dog needed grooming. This is a deeply distressing process for both of us, but you could tell he had entered the room because the smell hit you like a punch to the face. It was necessary. The process began with giving him breakfast, which was secretly laced with veterinarian-prescribed anti-anxiety medication. This was crucial because, after a previous visit, the groomer described him as a little anxious translation, an absolute nightmare to handle. So, medication it was. If you're leaving your pet with someone for hours, you want to make things as easy as possible, and it's pretty tough to be a handful when you're feeling loopy. Unfortunately, at this point, he realized what was happening. He knew that getting medicated meant he was about to be groomed. Cue the dramatic resistance, whining, sulking, and acting like he had forgotten how to walk. He refused to get out of the car, and when I finally managed to pull him out, he flopped onto the ground like he had no bones. Saturday was no exception. He was especially uncooperative, but in the end, the job got done. A few hours later, I picked him up, and eventually, he forgave me. Earlier today, I got a call from my girlfriend. She was already wheezing with laughter. Once I confirmed that it was amusement and not distress, she spilled the story. For the record, this is all secondhand information. I have no idea how fraud prevention or financial systems work. At some point in the past, my girlfriend's daughter's boyfriend, or possibly his parents, had their credit card details stolen. That was unfortunate. However, they were lucky because the fraudulent charges were reversed. Since the purchases weren't legitimate, the money was refunded. The boyfriend took away the wrong lesson from this experience. He assumed that if he made a bunch of purchases and then lost his card, he would get to keep everything he bought for free. Thinking he was being clever, he anonymously sent several expensive gifts to my girlfriend's daughter, things he assumed she would like, and had them delivered to her house. Then, he lost his card in the back seat of my car. Whether he intended to implicate me or not, I have no idea. Once the package was delivered, he reported his card as lost or stolen and claimed that someone had made unauthorized purchases with it. Whoever handled the investigation quickly noticed that all the so-called anonymous purchases had been sent to a location he had frequently shipped items to before just under different names. Some were addressed to his girlfriend, some to himself, but none were truly anonymous. Realizing this was not a legitimate case, the financial institution essentially responded with, "Absolutely not." At this point, I'm unsure if he was already in trouble, but he certainly was after what happened next. Remember the chaotic wrestling match I had with my dog to get him into the groomers? Yeah, the boyfriend's card must have fallen out of my car and landed on the ground during the struggle. I didn't notice because I was preoccupied with trying to maneuver an unhappy, mildly sedated, 38-pound dog without breaking anything. Someone else found the abandoned card and used it. A lot. In multiple locations. Because the boyfriend had just recently reported a fraudulent claim that was already rejected, it was now significantly harder for him to dispute the new, actual unauthorized charges. He was very upset about how things played out. He was even more devastated when my girlfriend's daughter broke up with him. I'd like to think she ended things because he tried to throw me under the bus, but I'm almost certain she dumped him because of his ill-conceived, fraudulent care package. Said package had been delivered to her father's house, addressed to current resident from an anonymous sender. Inside was a large bottle of the fragrance she wears, some intimate apparel in her exact size, and several other extremely expensive items, some of which were remote-controlled, and some of which were, let's just say, not designed with anatomical realism in mind. Her father found this absolutely hilarious and has not stopped teasing her about it. Annoyed by his relentless jokes, she called her mom to complain. My girlfriend, ever the sympathetic parent, comforted her with, "Well, we knew he was very attractive and not the brightest. What exactly did you expect?" Story 2. Situation 1. My entitled sister and her girlfriend got into a fight and stormed out of the house. When they came back, they trapped me in the living room, and my sister kept screaming, "Punch me, punch me, punch me." Seeing as playing along was my only real option, I did. That's when her girlfriend broke my nose. My sister then called the cops. Stupidly, I chose not to press charges. Situation 2. My entitled sister was throwing a fit, and when I ignored her and didn't give her the reaction she wanted, she ransacked my room, causing nearly $1,400 in damages. When I confronted her, she pulled out a stun gun, the same one I had bought for her so she could defend herself. I disarmed her and knocked her out. The house situation. I had been staying with my boyfriend, who lives with his grandparents and his uncle. His uncle is a 44-year-old, alcohol-dependent man who struggles with paranoid schizophrenia. He is convinced that we are spying on him and constantly spews ridiculous accusations. On 2 separate occasions, he has threatened to harm both me and my boyfriend, but I have ignored him because he is all talk and not worth the stress. Yesterday, he thought my boyfriend had gone into his room, even though nobody did. In retaliation, he threatened to storm into our room and destroy our belongings. He specifically mentioned the gaming console, television, and computers. I have an $800 computer that, thankfully, wasn't in my room when my entitled sister trashed it. If he ever touches it, I don't know how I'll keep my composure. February 2nd incident. On February 2nd, I 17M was home alone with my boyfriend 18M because February 1st was his 18th birthday. My entitled sister 16F and her girlfriend 18, male to female transgender, were also there. With no adult supervision, they didn't miss the chance to act up. My sister started yelling and making a scene, eventually throwing an aluminum house-shaped decoration at me. It hit me right between my kneecap and the muscle. I ignored her, which she didn't like. So, she stormed upstairs to my room located in the attic, with the entrance in my mom's bedroom at the far end of the stairs. My sister's room was right at the top of the stairs, so she clearly went into my space. I heard her footsteps stomping up, followed by a loud crash. My boyfriend and I decided to escape the chaos and walked to my grandmother's house in -4 degrees Celsius weather. When I returned home, my sister came up to me and said, "We're pretty sure we heard the cats go up to your room and break something." Immediately, I knew that was nonsense. "Oh, it has absolutely nothing to do with you going upstairs and smashing something." "I heard you. I'm not stupid," I snapped. At that point, my mom was home. We were in her room since it led to the attic, my former bedroom. I had just moved in with my boyfriend for obvious reasons. She tried to de-escalate the situation, saying, "Oh, don't be like that. It was probably the cats." She hadn't been home at the time, so I couldn't blame her for believing my sister's story. Discovering the damage. Frustrated, I went upstairs with my boyfriend to assess the damage. The first thing I noticed was that my katana set, a 3-piece signature collection with only 50 like it in the world, 25 sharpened, 25 unsharpened for training, was not where I had left it. The blades were out of their scabbards, and the scabbard of my katana was shattered beyond repair. That was a $650 blade left exposed to the elements, at risk of rusting and becoming completely worthless. The wakizashi, the shorter companion sword, was also out of its scabbard. It was sitting next to my electronic keyboard, which had been knocked off its stand. The most infuriating part? The stand was bolted to the floor, yet the keyboard had been ripped from it, while the stand itself remained upright. That was not something a cat could do. Thank goodness my computer was at my boyfriend's house that day. That was an $800 machine, and had it been there, I have no doubt it would have been destroyed as well. Confrontation. Fueled by rage, I grabbed the wakizashi and stormed downstairs, casually walking past my mom toward my sister's room. The moment I reached the stairs, my sister and her girlfriend rushed inside and locked the door behind them, as if a simple lock was going to stop me. I kicked the door in as if it were made of cardboard and immediately started yelling. Do you honestly expect me to believe that the cats somehow grew to 5 feet tall, developed thumbs, and smashed my keyboard? That they managed to rip it off a bolted stand without knocking the stand over? You must think I'm incredibly gullible if you expect me to fall for that. While I was ranting, I absent-mindedly swung the wakizashi around, emphasizing my frustration. I found this next to my destroyed keyboard. Care to explain that? My mom, who had jumped out of bed when she heard me kick in the door, was behind me, repeatedly screaming, "It wasn't them," over and over again. The fear in my sister and her girlfriend's eyes was almost satisfying. They genuinely thought I was going to hurt them. I wasn't. Instead, I took out my frustration on the already broken door, slashing at it with the blade when I felt myself getting too out of control. Once I finished yelling, I took a deep breath, turned around, and said, "This was used to destroy my keyboard. There is no way a cat could have done that. I'm going to reconstruct the scene exactly as it was, and then you can come upstairs and tell me with a straight face that the cats did it." Exposing the lie. My boyfriend and I went upstairs and carefully put everything back the way we had found it: the broken scabbard, the displaced swords, the keyboard off its stand. Then I called my mom up. I pointed out exactly where I had originally left my swords and where they had ended up. I showed her the shattered scabbard and explained how impossible the damage to my keyboard was. That was the moment she realized she had been lied to. Not long after, my sister and her girlfriend showed me the replacements they had ordered online. The taser incident. The next day, my boyfriend and I ran the numbers, and the total damages came up to approximately $2,400. I went downstairs and told my sister and her girlfriend how much they needed to pay back. Actions have consequences, I told them. You need to take responsibility for what you've done. She didn't like that. Instead of admitting fault, she pulled out the stun gun I had bought for her, ironically, the same one I had given her for self-defense because she had been repeatedly harassed. But here's the thing: I'm a trained martial artist. I've trained myself to react on instinct. When a weapon gets pulled on me, it always ends up in my hands, and the person holding it ends up on the ground. That's exactly what happened. The moment she tried to use it, I disarmed her, and she hit the floor. My knuckles were bruised, but I wasn't about to let myself get tased. She called the cops. The authorities are now presenting the case to the district attorney to rule out charges, and things are most likely in my favor. Next time, I'm not handling it myself. I'm going straight to the police. I was too nice this time because her girlfriend is 18, and a criminal charge would go on her permanent record. Initially, I wanted to be civil, just have them pay me back or replace what they destroyed, and I would let it slide. But clearly, you can't reason with entitled people. Story 3. I am an attorney, and a few years ago, I prosecuted juvenile delinquency cases at the district attorney's office in my state. The sheer number of neglectful parents I encountered was disheartening, but not at all surprising. The irresponsible ones were frustrating, but the entitled ones were absolutely infuriating. Before I dive into this, there is something important to understand about working in this field. Teenagers make bad decisions. All of them. The intelligent ones, the struggling ones, the well-behaved, the rebellious, the religious, the non-religious, the mama's boys, the cheerleaders, and the athletes. I say this as someone who fully acknowledges that I, too, was a teenager who made bad decisions. I once chugged an entire bottle of maple syrup just because I saw it in a movie. Because of this, you have to look beyond just the crime or their circumstances. You have to consider the bigger picture when dealing with juvenile cases. One of the biggest headaches in my job. A certain social media app because the send inappropriate pictures culture really starts hitting kids around ages 14 to 16. By now, I'm sure most people understand why a 15-year-old sending such a picture is a serious issue. Of course, once relationships end, the pictures often get shared with friends or circulated throughout their school. Rather than charging these kids with possessing and distributing illegal content, something that could have long-term, life-altering consequences, I found a statute related to the unauthorized distribution of electronic property. The charges fit the elements of that law and allowed me to hold them accountable without putting them on a certain registry if they moved. The goal was to teach a lesson, make them understand the severity of their actions, and show them that next time, the legal consequences could be far worse. The victims and their parents were usually on board because this approach ensured actual consequences, juvenile probation, while also including an opportunity for the victim to express in court how they were affected. I also required the offending kid to sincerely apologize. Most of the parents of these kids, while not happy about the situation, accepted that their child had made a serious mistake. Except for one entitled mother. She stopped me after court one day, standing beside her son, to ask some questions. Entitled mother, "You're treating my son like a criminal when he's just a kid." Me, "I know he's just a kid, and I'm not saying he's a bad person. But he needs to understand how serious this is, because if he does something like this when he turns 18, we're having a very different conversation." Entitled mother scoffs. "Okay, fine. But what about the girl? What's she being charged with?" Me, blank stare, "Excuse me." Entitled mother, "She did the same thing my son did, right? Why isn't she being charged with anything?" Me, "Because we don't charge and punish victims of crimes." Entitled mother huffs, "Well, I don't think she should just get away with it. She's the one who sent my son the pictures that got him in trouble. She's just as guilty as anyone else and started all of this." At this point, I had to take a deep breath to keep from raising my voice outside the courtroom. Me, "Okay, well, your son sent those pictures to his friends after they broke up, and they ended up circulating throughout the entire school. This young lady has had to suffer the consequences of that humiliation, judgment, and everything else that comes with it. Now, had your son come to you when she first sent him the pictures and expressed concern about how inappropriate he found them, I would have happily treated him as a victim and made sure the young lady understood the seriousness of what she had done. But he didn't do that, and we both know why. The second he made the choice to take those pictures and share them with others, he became the one responsible for victimizing this girl. However, if you feel strongly that she should be held accountable for her actions because what she did was technically illegal, I'm open to hearing your concerns. Of course, that would mean I'd have to take a more literal approach to everyone's actions in this case. That would likely result in me charging your son with possession and distribution of inappropriate material involving a minor to ensure that everyone is held to the same standard of responsibility. And you're free to count." At this point, the kid's attorney quickly stepped in, said, "Sorry," and whisked them both away. At the next hearing, the boy ended up pleading guilty and offered a tearful apology after hearing, in open court, just how much harm he had caused his former girlfriend. When the judge asked if the entitled mother had anything to say on her son's behalf, she remained completely silent. Story 4. I live in Singapore, so we have plenty of difficult customers, but most of them are not too extreme, more like a very mild version of what you would typically call a Karen. I have many friends, but only one of them has ever encountered a full-fledged entitled person. At that time, he was extremely prone to panic attacks, so I always tried to keep him away from stressful situations. He also happens to be my best friend. This took place in a mall, so there were plenty of people watching. We had just bought a Nintendo Switch, and my best friend was brimming with excitement. You could see that he was eager to get home and start playing. It also happened to be the last one in stock, as it was a particularly busy day. Then, in walked the entitled woman. The following conversation took place in Chinese. Entitled woman, "Excuse me." Me, "Yes." Entitled woman, Is that a Nintendo Switch your friend is holding? Me? Yes. We bought it because it's his birthday. Entitled woman. Oh, well, can I buy it from you? My best friend, who was listening to the conversation, looked disturbed and said, Sorry, Auntie, but I've been wanting to buy this for years, and this is the last one in stock. Maybe you can check again next week. Entitled woman. No, my son wants that Switch. He is very disabled, and he deserves it. Her son, hearing his mother shouting, ran over and tried to pull her away, but he was only around 5 years old, so he couldn't do much. Then, to my surprise, the entitled woman yanked the little boy and pointed at his face while screaming, See? Look at how much he wants the game. Give it to him. Now. Her son, shocked by the sudden aggression, burst into tears. Entitled woman. See? Look what you've done. Realizing that we were dealing with an entitled person, I jokingly said, Sorry, ma'am, but I don't speak entitlement. Now, she was fuming. She attempted to snatch the Switch from my best friend's hands, causing him to drop it. The floor was made of gravel, which scratched the console badly. When my best friend picked it up, he saw the deep scratches all over it. His eyes started welling up, and he began to hyperventilate. The entitled woman, seeing the damage, decided it was now unworthy and grabbed her child, attempting to walk away as if nothing had happened. Seeing my friend devastated over the ruined console, I took a deep breath and approached the woman. Me. Hey, stop right there. You just damaged my friend's Switch, and you're just going to walk away? You better apologize and pay for the damages. The entitled woman, looking annoyed, said, It's not my fault he didn't give it to me. If he had just handed it over, this wouldn't have happened. You shouldn't be mad at me. She then proceeded to berate my friend, who was still struggling to catch his breath. Then, she did the unthinkable, she slapped both him and me. I was absolutely shocked at her audacity. I tried to keep my cool, but I had reached my limit. I am pretty strong for my age, so when I throw a punch, it lands hard. I swung my right fist, and with a satisfying crunch, the entitled woman was knocked to the floor. Her nose was bleeding, and her lips were cut. She started backtracking and yelling about how she was going to sue us for assault and emotional distress. I calmed my friend down, and just then, a kind mall security officer arrived to de-escalate the situation. He initially looked at me as if I was the one at fault, but luckily, a bystander explained the whole story. His expression shifted from shock to a grim understanding. He detained the entitled woman, and soon after, the police arrived to take our statements. The entitled woman was arrested, but unfortunately, that wasn't the last I saw of her. She was attempting to sue me for assault, and I would be seeing her in court the next day. Thankfully, my lawyer, who also happened to be my uncle, told me I had nothing to worry about since my actions could be considered self-defense. We were also filing a countersuit against her for the same charges. Hey guys, sorry for keeping you all waiting. I couldn't update sooner because I was grounded for punching someone, even though my parents agreed she deserved it. My mother acknowledged that what I did wasn't severe enough for a harsh punishment, so I was only grounded for a few days. In the meantime, my phone was given to my younger brother. Now, onto the court case. It was actually quite simple. The entitled woman completely ruined her own case from the moment she opened her mouth. As the judge went through the usual formalities, she was glaring at me the entire time. Her nose was wrapped in bandages, and I could barely stop myself from laughing. When her lawyer started speaking, he twisted the entire story in a way that only someone truly entitled could come up with. The woman was portrayed as the poor and innocent victim, while my friend and I were described as heartless and cruel young people who had ruined her precious child's day. For a brief moment, it seemed like things might go her way. But then, it was our turn. My mother and I patiently waited while our lawyer presented the truth with witness testimonies and security footage as evidence. To make matters worse for her, the video had audio. The moment the video ended, the entitled woman sat there in disbelief. Even her own lawyer looked embarrassed. When the judge questioned him about whether he had known the full story, He could only admit that he had no idea she was actually the aggressor. Victory had never been so sweet. The first thing that came out of the entitled woman's mouth after that was an insult directed at my mother. Then she called my friend and me all sorts of terrible names. My father was overseas, so he wasn't present, but the judge immediately warned her to stop behaving inappropriately in court. Instead of listening, she told the judge to be quiet in an extremely disrespectful way. That was the final straw. Not only had she given false statements and assaulted 2 teenagers, but now she was being verbally abusive in court. To top it off, she cursed at the judge. She went on a tirade, saying that my friend and I deserved to be punished by a higher power. I simply laughed and told her that I wasn't religious. The judge banged the gavel and gave the final verdict. The entitled woman was sentenced to jail and fined for giving false statements, physical assault, and verbal abuse. She was also ordered to pay for the damage to the Nintendo Switch, and we received compensation well beyond the console's value. So yeah, that's the full update. If you enjoyed it, great. If not, well, that's life. Story 5. I, 26-year-old woman at the time, had just started dating Thomas, 28-year-old man, and things seemed promising. He was a very sweet man, educated, quite intelligent, and had good looks. After 7 weeks of dating, he invited me and 2 of his childhood friends, let's call them Alex and Bart, for an extended weekend to celebrate his 29th birthday at his father's country house in a small French town. His father was going to be there as well, and I was excited to meet everyone. Day 1 Friday was enjoyable. I got along well with Thomas' father, who was a smart and caring man, and everything seemed perfect. Day 2 Saturday started off wonderfully. After a nice day, we attended a party in the garden with the neighbors, including some of Thomas' friends. A few hours in, with plenty of drinks flowing, a group of people gathered around a small campfire and started sharing childhood memories. That's when everything took a turn for the worse. At first, the stories were the usual innocent and silly ones you'd expect. But then Thomas and his friends began sharing some truly disturbing stories. One, in particular, was horrifying. They talked about how, when they were 14 or 15 years old, they found it amusing to bully a boy from their school named Arthur, who was very isolated and shy. They mocked him, called him names, and tormented him for nearly 6 months. But it didn't stop there. As if that weren't cruel enough, they created a fake online profile of a girl using a messaging platform that was popular in the early 2000s. They spent months exchanging messages with Arthur under this false identity, flirting and developing what he believed to be a genuine relationship. Some students at school were in on the joke, and it became an ongoing, cruel prank at Arthur's expense. They even used real pictures of Bart's cousin to make the deception more believable. Arthur truly thought he had an online girlfriend, someone he confided in and sent heartfelt messages to. Eventually, when they got bored, they set up a fake in-person meeting, tricking him into taking a long bus ride 2 or 3 hours while wearing a specific t-shirt as part of an inside joke. Of course, no one was there waiting for him. They had no idea how long he stood there alone before realizing he had been deceived. If he hadn't figured it out by then, he certainly did the next day when Thomas and Bart told the entire school about it, sharing his private messages and humiliating him further. Arthur stopped attending school shortly after and eventually transferred. It's easy to imagine how traumatizing the experience must have been for him. Do you think Thomas, Alex, and Bart showed any remorse? Not in the slightest. In fact, Thomas and Bart seemed to find it amusing even years later. They laughed about it and even expressed regret that they hadn't been evil enough to convince Arthur to send inappropriate pictures. I don't even want to imagine how much worse it could have been if he had. Saying that I felt uncomfortable would be a massive understatement. I was absolutely horrified and, at that moment, started to despise Thomas. I wasn't the only one who was disgusted. His father, who overheard the end of the story, had the most disappointed look in his eyes. But Thomas was too drunk to notice. I couldn't stand it anymore, so I left the party and went back to the house. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I kept replaying the conversation in my mind, thinking about how Thomas still found it funny. I heard him come to bed around 4 a.m., but I pretended to be asleep. Day 3 Sunday, the actual birthday, was supposed to be special. The original plan was for me to take Thomas out for a private, fancy surprise lunch nearby before rejoining the group for a late afternoon party. But after what I had learned the night before, there was no way I could go through with it. I woke up early, packed my belongings in silence, and left for the train station. I took a direct train back to Paris without telling anyone. However, I didn't just disappear, I had a small plan in mind. Once I was on the train, I sent Thomas a text wishing him a happy birthday. I told him to meet me at a specific location about an hour away from the house for a surprise, and explained that I needed to go ahead to make sure everything was perfect. I had picked the location at random using an online map, purely to buy myself time. Thomas read the message around 10 a.m. when he woke up. He replied excitedly, saying he would follow my instructions exactly. When he arrived at the location at 12:30 p.m., I messaged him, telling him there was a slight delay and to wait a little longer. Then, I gave him a second location this time, a restaurant about a 30-minute drive from where he was. When he reached the restaurant at 1:15 p.m., I texted him again. I told him I was on my way and would arrive in 20 minutes. I hinted that once he saw me, he would understand why I had made him wait. I also asked him to go ahead and order food and the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu. By 1:30 p.m., he started calling me repeatedly and sending frantic texts. He was clearly confused and beginning to panic. I ignored his messages until 2:15 p.m., at which point I finally responded with a single text in French. "So, how does it feel to have someone play with your emotions?" Then, I stopped responding entirely. Thomas continued calling and texting all afternoon, but I ignored every single message. At some point, an unknown number called me. It was his friend Alex. He was upset, saying that I had completely ruined Thomas' birthday and demanding to know what was going on. I simply replied, "This is an extremely small payback for what you did to Arthur. Tell Thomas to stop calling me." Then I hung up and blocked them. Despite my anger, I couldn't shake the sadness that lingered throughout the evening. I had started to grow attached to Thomas, and even though I now saw his true colors, the disappointment stung. In the days that followed, a mutual friend reached out to tell me that my reaction was completely irrational and unfair. They argued that it wasn't my place to punish someone for things they did as a teenager, and that I should have handled the situation in a more mature way. Most people sided with Thomas, and only a handful supported what I did. The rest thought I had been unnecessarily harsh. Some even called me heartless for ruining his birthday over something from his past. Thomas himself tried to reach out and fix things for months afterward, but I never responded to any of his messages. I have no regrets. I simply hope that Arthur, who should be around 35 or 36 years old now, is doing well. Story 6. In our mid-20s, my husband and I purchased and moved into our rather modest first house with our infant daughter. I made a big effort to meet and befriend our neighbors, and all of them warned me to be careful of one particular person, Jane. Jane had lived in the street for 3 years at this point and had earned herself some really bad nicknames as she was manipulating, intimidating, and thoroughly awful. Jane ran a daycare from her house, but neighbors on both sides reported hearing her scream at the children and leave them unsupervised in the garden. It's important to note that Jane's partner is a police officer. The neighbors were scared of retaliation if they reported her or stood up to her. It seemed that Jane would use this to get away with her horrific behavior. Our house had a driveway with a dropped curb big enough for one car, but we could fit both if you blocked in the first and only used the second car. Parking on the street was very limited, and we had double yellow lines outside our house, not allowed to stop park there. During some essential roof work, our driveway was taken up by scaffolding and a skip, so we parked in the street, and my husband parked outside Jane's house. The next day, when he went to his car and Jane came running down her path shouting at him, she screamed about his antisocial parking, that his car would be towed, and that he could expect it to be scratched up if he left it there any longer. My husband calmly explained it was a public road and she had no right to police the space. Her screeches at this point were loud enough that I and several neighbors heard and came to see the commotion. Her partner was perched at the door during all of this, saying and doing nothing. When she saw me on the pavement with our daughter, she pointed and screamed, "You'll have the social on you if you don't get lost. I'll scratch you right up." At this point I told my husband to come back and we were calling the police. She responded, "Call the police, I dare you. He's," pointing at her partner, "a policeman. He'll sort you out. You won't know what hit you." At this point my husband looked at her husband and said, "Is that right? And you're agreeing with what she said?" The partner nodded and said, "You need to move or accept the consequences. You call the police, it won't get you anywhere." Funnily, when I then took out my phone and dialed the non-police emergency number on speakerphone and made a police report, both of them looked a lot less confident. Jane stood there open-mouthed, then grabbed her partner and slammed the door. And we haven't heard from her since. Edit to add, her partner was placed on suspension due to the allegation, and further allegations from our neighbors. He then returned to an admin role. After our confrontation, Jane was given a warning for a public order offense. However, due to a number of reports, her daycare closed, and she is no longer able to mind children. Their house is up for sale. However, as she made a number of modifications without proper planning or work people, its price is significantly lower than they expected, and they're in negative equity. All because of a parking space